a Build Hatch developed production.
Hello, I'm Aaron Kyle and welcome to another episode of Build Hatch. On this week's episode of Build Hatch, I got to sit down in Melbourne and chat with Roger Borland from Borland Architecture. Roger originally grew up in Country Island as one of 8 children living on a farm. Roger has a really interesting history, and on this week's episode, you'll get to hear his story and what led him to now running one of Melbourne's successful architecture practices, building amazing projects all over Melbourne. Roger also discusses his passion for quality in building and the key collaboration effort and process that him and his team put in every week to ensure that a client knows early on just how much their project will cost and the practical expectations that they set when working with his clients. So let's get into it. Roger from Borland Architecture in Melbourne, welcome to Build Hatch.
Thanks very much. I appreciate the invite to come on the show.
That's okay. So we're recording this in beautiful Melbourne, and I'm picking up on a bit of an accent. So I'm looking forward to getting the real story here. So you're obviously an architect and principal of your own firm. So before you got into architecture, take us back all the way to the very beginning. Whereabouts did you grow up?
So I grew up in the northwest of Ireland, one of the most beautiful places that I've ever been in the world, I have to say.
Really?
In County Donegal. So it's a pretty rural part of Ireland, really in the middle of nowhere. And I grew up on a small farm, and one of 8 kids, which was pretty full on. And
big Irish Catholic family?
No, Protestant family actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which was interesting as well. But it was a wonderful place to grow up. It really was. And
so farm kid.
Farm kid, yeah. We always got our hands dirty on the farm. And, we all had to chip in and do the work, and that was a big part of our growing up. You sort of had no choice. It wasn't even questioned that you would get your hands dirty and get out there and get on with it.
So was that your parents' main job, like working off the farm?
Yeah. My mum was a traditional housewife, I suppose, looking after 8 kids, and my dad worked the land. And then as we all grew up, we became more and more involved and helped out and more things as we went through.
What sort of farming was it?
Cattle and sheep. So it was fairly hilly land, and so it wasn't great for crops, although we did grow our own crops for the animals. Always stuff to do, and the weather isn't great there.
Yeah, it's pretty rugged weather up there, isn't it? Yeah,
it's a bit cold in the winter time, so that's one of the reasons I'm in Australia.
Yeah, no doubt. Melbourne, mind you.
It's still a lot better than northwest of Ireland,
for sure. So, what sort of kid were you at school? Like, did you have a bit of a plan to become an architect, or like, what sort of process was involved with that?
Well, I had no experience of architecture whatsoever growing up. As I say, growing up on a farm, we were all involved in farming. My sisters were nurses and school teachers, but there was nobody in the construction industry at all. But we would often have builders come to our house and do things around, build extensions or whatever, and we get our hands dirty as part of that. And on a farm, we just used to fix everything, we never really bought anything new. A piece of equipment broke down, we'd get it in the workshop and pull it apart and put it back together. So it was very much a case that, I was hands-on putting things together and really, really enjoyed that side of it. And the first sort of instance that I really got involved in anything that related to architecture, I suppose, was at school, secondary school, and I was doing technical drawing. And at that stage, it was no computers at all. It was all just hand drawing with set squares and T-squares and all that sort of thing.
All old school,
making
paper.
I loved that. I loved the way that you could form geometry from lines and just create things that were actually quite marvelous in my mind, and how you could work out mathematically how all of those things went together was really interesting. And so I really latched onto that and was really good at it during school. And I suppose saw an avenue in that potentially that could lead into something like architecture. And the skill sets that would be involved in that might transfer across. So that's really the first instance that was the connection.
So was that something you strive to like get into from, like, is it the same as Australia over in Ireland in terms of you finish high school and apply to get into universities?
Yeah, it is. So my grades coming out of school, I wasn't the best kid at education. Whenever I was at school, I was a bit distracted. Went to a mixed boarding school, which was great
Oh,
fun.
really?
And this was, we would go there during the week and then get home at the weekends. But I just had a lot of fun at school and wasn't really particularly studious or thought that was really important. And I guess that's one of the things growing up in a farm. You traditionally, you just go through that as a process and then you end up at the other end on the farm. For me, that was never really going to be too much of an option because I had two elder brothers and they were always going to take the farm over. So yeah, during the school period, then I went through some career guidance, and somebody suggested, "Oh, you're really good at that. Maybe think about going down that way." And that was kind of the first thought that I had. Maybe I should actually think of architecture or something along those lines, at least. But no, it wasn't certainly defined at that stage what I would be doing.
Yeah, right.
So it was, yeah, as I finished with the school period, then I was thinking about the next stage. I didn't have the grades to go straight to university. So I did a foundation course and decided to do that in construction. So it was a pretty generic certificate course for 2 years that took me across all aspects of construction, from surveying to mechanics to structure and all the different components of it. So I got a really good overview of it all. And during that
That would have been
period,
a really good practical perspective, I'd imagine.
fantastic. Yeah, really, really. And I did really well on that and really enjoyed it. Because of that sort of broad spectrum and very practical and its application, it really suited me, I think. But it also kind of redefined that, yeah, architecture was maybe the way forward coming out of this, that's maybe where the skill sets lay a bit more. And so, I did quite well out of that and then got straight into university in England. So I went to the University of Lincolnshire and Humberside in Hull, which was another experience as well. So that it was fantastic. I really enjoyed that because Hull's it's an odd sort of city. It's quite isolated up in the northeast of England. It's nothing like London or the major other cities. It's quite local, and it's
Is it
very
a bit
working
like
class.
Bath?
Bath's a lot more upper class than Hull would
All
be.
right.
Hull's pretty dirty sort of working class town, and really hardworking people that stay there all their life. It would have been a shipping town and a lot of industry in the past, and it sort of filtered
So a real
down.
blue collar vibe to it.
Yeah, and unemployment was pretty high, but the drinks were cheap, and and there were students from all over the world there who were in a similar position that me, that weren't the Cambridge kids, but grew up in this sort of experience that where they had to go at it from a different aspect, and we all sort of got on pretty well from that perspective. And yeah, had a great time there for 3 years, and was okay, studious enough to get through it, but wasn't top of the class by any means. And yeah, enjoyed that time and met my wife there at that stage, or she was my girlfriend at that stage. So we married, yeah, just before coming over here after a bit.
So is she an Aussie?
No, she's originally from Ghana in West Africa, but
Yeah,
she
right.
spent a lot of time in London prior to going to uni in Hull. So that was probably the best part of out of that, meeting her and setting up that life.
Absolutely.
So then after that, the architecture course there is split into four different parts. So the first one's the undergrad, which I did in Hull. Then you've got a year out, which I did in Cambridge, with a little one-man band architecture firm. And he did a lot of conservation work, and it was all pretty traditional stuff, which, I had no real intention of doing traditional things, but it was a good learning experience from the point of view as I knew he was going to give me a lot of hands-on experience being a small practice.
What's conservation architecture? What sort of work is that?
So as you can imagine, in the UK, there's buildings that are hundreds, if not thousands, of years old, which is a bit different than Australia. So and the heritage overlays on a lot of those are pretty strict in what you can and can't do. So he in Cambridge had a lot of old barn conversions that he would work in. So they were either previous residences that had been converted from a traditional barn, or were traditional barns that he was then converting into the first residence. So there was a lot of work in that sort of sphere. It was all residential stuff, and that's where I actually won my first ever job. So it was a little job that he got interviewed for with a young couple in the Cambridge city itself, for a little terrace house. And the clients rang back about a week later and said, "Look, we really like you, but you do all this conservation stuff. It's not really what we do. We think, we need something a bit more contemporary." And the receptionist in the office at the time said, "Oh, we actually have a young student here, and he's really into the contemporary side of stuff. And, we could do that if you were really into it." And he was there, and he was going, "Go on, go for it, go for it, all right." And said, "Oh, maybe he could come to the interview." So I went to interview. He let me go, and I won the job for the practice as a student. And
Wow.
he overviewed the whole thing, obviously, and let me work through it that whole year. So it was a fantastic experience that had my
That
own
was.
clients, my own project, and a mentor that worked through the whole process with me. And
Yeah, that's fascinating.
yeah, so it was good little extension job that just set me up nicely for where I wanted to head from there, which was then on to Liverpool University, and that was for my post-grad.
And how long does that go for, the postgrad?
2 years, two
Two
years
years.
doing that. Yeah.
So it's on par with Australia, really, like a full licensed architect with a practicing or registered architect with a full practicing certificate, roughly seven years or so.
Yeah, correct. So it's 5 years book based in university, and then there's 2 years out, and so one in between the two, post grad and the undergrad, and then one after the post grad to get your full certification. So you got to do 24 months of on site experience.
Yeah,
So
that's
yeah,
right.
it's a long course.
It is. And rewarding at the end, though, just to be able to design spaces and projects from the get go is just, yeah, it must be so rewarding.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I found that the on-site experience was hugely beneficial for me. As I said, I wasn't particularly studious, and that practical side versus the theoretical side of it, I really thrived in the practical side. And I think that had to do with my upbringing. Being on the farm, putting things together manually. That was the way I thought and the way my brain works. That I have to do it that way. And since I've left university, I've had to develop the other side a lot, the design side, the theory of architecture and how things need to be put together for a reason and in a specific way. That's taken me longer to do, and it's something that I really embrace and enjoy now, because I just love learning about architecture and how different aspects of it can influence the whole.
Obviously, economics plays a large part in where you can choose to take that direction, but it must be an absolute dream when you do have that client that trusts you with that knowledge and that experience to then tie all that story of architecture together with the end user.
Yeah, it takes a lot of trust, but you also, you take a lot of the brief from the client and use their experiences and what they are going to develop into this house or this building over the years, and you sort of build that future history into the process, and that's really important for me. I'm never designing a building for now or the past. I'm building it for the future, and you need to understand the past in order to build a strong future building, because there's a lot of things have been done and done really well, and there's also a lot of mistakes have been made in the past from everybody, and it's really important to understand those and not make the same mistakes, but also take all those learnings and really make it a better building for the future.
So what brought you over to Australia?
So whenever I finished my post-grad and I was doing my last year out, I got engaged and we got married. And it was really a case at that stage, well, I could easily have got a job in Manchester where I was at that time and sort of settled down, had kids, bought a house in suburbia. But we both sort of agreed that we weren't quite ready for that and we would really enjoy a year out and go and experience something different. So Australia was the choice after going through many other options. But Australia was somewhere that I've always wanted to go. I had friends that came here from primary school years and years and years ago, and I always had this fantasy of what it would be like over there and how to experience that life. So we set off to have a year here. We did 6 months in Sydney, and I was doing on a working holiday visa there for a little company up there. We did beach homes, which is again just completely different than anything I'd ever done before. It was fantastic, just doing these multi-million-dollar homes on the edge of the waterfront in Sydney. It's just spectacular.
All right.
And a really small boutique little practice as well that taught me a lot. And then after that was over, we really enjoyed our time up there, but we were proper tourists, and that was the intent. Came to Melbourne and started working for one of the bigger practices in town, and got sponsored within 2 months of being here, and said, well, maybe we'll stay for another year and work through this process. And at that time, it was 2007, 2008, and the GFC was obviously hitting in Europe pretty bad, and a lot of my colleagues over there were coming out of work and couldn't find other jobs and were working as taxi drivers and all sorts of things. And I said, well, there's no point in going back to that. So I stayed another year and then just built and built and built. And, I ended up working for 2 or 3 of the bigger practices in town doing big education projects, big commercial projects, big housing projects, master planning, really, really fantastic projects that, I wouldn't have had the opportunity really to work on a lot of other places. And I thought it's too good an opportunity to turn down. And with everything that's going on in Europe, why would I go back to doing that?
Why go back? So
it's always had the intent to spend the last 2 months going around the rest of Australia, but never quite got there. That's still on the agenda, 15 years later.
Yeah. That's what happens.
So yeah, we absolutely love Melbourne. I've got 2 young kids who are proper Aussies here now, so we're well settled.
Yeah, great. So take me to the step of going out on your own and setting up Borland Architecture. I mean, you're well known, have an amazing reputation in Melbourne and building some beautiful homes on the coast as well. So take me through that process of how you did that.
Yeah, I suppose it's taken quite a long time for me to get to this point. One is, like I mentioned before, I'm always trying to learn about what's around me and learn the mistakes of other people and what they have done well as well, so that I can gather all that information and really put it into my arsenal. And so working for the big practices and there was primary years being here was really important because of all the systems they have in place and how they manage everything really well. So gathered a lot of information out of that, but they weren't necessarily building typologies that I wanted to move forward with in my own career. So I did then seek out some more boutique practices to work for in the residential spaces that were doing higher end architecture. And I really wanted to learn how that side of it worked and how the connections and the business management of all of that all worked, as well as, the technical side and the detailing and the real important parts of how it all comes together. And so again, I learned the good and the bad from a few of those practices. So I spent about 4 years doing that. And then an opportunity came up to move into the design and build space. And I thought, well, this is a side that a lot of architects never actually veer into. And they're a bit scared of it in some ways because, they see themselves as above that often. And they say, oh, house builders, that's a realm below. But to me, I saw real value in how to understand the construction side really well from an architectural point of view and how buildings go together. And again, feeds in well to that practical way that I think about buildings. And I really wanted to understand the mechanics of how that works and also the economics of it all. Um, and and from that, I really learned that the collaboration with builder, architect, quantity surveyor, engineer, everybody from the initial stages of the concept right through the whole process is really important to them, because they had to hit a price point. And to me, that was something that architects really lacked, where they take their brief from the client, they design a fantastic building, they go through all these processes right up to tender stage. Then they put it out to the market, maybe for builders. They get the prices back, and it's 20% over where they thought it should be. And I thought, well, we can do a lot better than
We
that.
can do better than that.
We have to do better than that. It's putting far too much pressure on the architect to really guess what the price might be from square meters, and we really don't have the experience in that. And the people who do have the experience in that is the builders. And so let's engage them as early as possible in this process so that we can gather that information and take the pressure off ourselves. And it also helps the clients to build that relationship with those builders from an early stage. And it cuts out a lot of the time then as well, because you don't necessarily have to go to tender, although there's still the option to do that if they want to.
Yeah, or maybe just a health check, so to speak.
Yeah, correct. So you might still run a quantity surveyor on the side just to make sure that things are happening in the right way. So that was really important that I sort of went through that process, and I thought that would be really valuable for me in the future. What happened with that is that design build company unfortunately went into administration, and it happened because they took on more than they could chew, to be honest, and they took their eye off the ball on the bigger end. But I was the director of architecture in there, and my side of it was actually running really well, and we were getting some fantastic projects through the door. But it was all under the same banner, and it had to all fall apart at the same time. But what it did happen was that the chairman of that previous company approached me after this happened. They said, well, we've got a whole bunch of design clients here that were partly through their design process. They'd actually want to continue working with you. Do you want to actually set up a partnership to actually finish that work, and then we can put ourselves out there to the wider community as an architectural practice from there? And so I set up a company in partnership with him to do that, which is a really nice stepping stone, because I didn't have to go out and find new clients. I already had ready-made clients to run into. The majority of those were really happy to move across and continue their projects with me, which was great. And then COVID hit, 6 months after that happened. And we had those projects to work with, but then we had nothing on our plate for another 6 months. And I was starting to get cold feet, really, that I could probably do this myself and go out there and do the marketing and do it a bit better and have full control. And so I decided that I would approach my partner and suggest that, I could do this myself. I've still got him on the side bringing work in as a business consultant. But he wasn't an architect in the first place. He comes from the construction side. And I really thought that I could drive this forward better myself. So I did that September last year. So it's just been over a year as Borland Architecture now.
And you've been flat out ever since, no doubt.
Yeah. It's been pretty crazy since that, to be honest. I think the whole COVID thing and people starting to realize that they need to get a spade in the ground pretty quickly has come around to the realization, and the workload doubled pretty quickly around about September last year.
And I think you touched on an important point before, having that practical knowledge of designing something that clients can afford to build and fund for the ultimate user at the end of the day. And that's so important. And particularly now, because every day I'm having these conversations with people on the ground as well. I was talking to a plasterer this morning, catching up with him, and he was telling me same thing, that he's been a loyal account holder where he gets his plasterboard and gyprock from for 23 years. And he's giving feedback to his clients to say, well, look, this is how much it is. And they're obviously balking at it. And he's had 3 price rises in the last 6 months. That particular product, it's produced on home soil in Australia.
Mm.
So if people don't start doing something about it, and if they don't have that practical knowledge that you're talking about, projects won't evolve into being built on the ground. They'll just be designed and then put away in the bottom drawer.
Yeah, or either that or the clients are paying far more than they ever expected to
Yes,
from the
that's right.
outset. Yeah, we want to try and get in front of that as an issue and say, well, we can do better, and there's a mechanism here to actually ensure that we can manage that process and manage your brief from the very start so that it fits your budget and remains fitting your budget through this process. Because as we know, as you said, the prices of everything's just gone through the roof.
Totally. And I mean, what's the best approach to take from an architect's perspective in doing that? Is it a case of you having a bit of a backup design, or is it a case of, well, we might have this product on the front elevation and around the side, but then we'll change that around the back where it can't be seen from street level? Like what sort of approach is best for that sort of scenario?
Well, I design holistically. I never try and design the front facade to be better than the back, and also inside, outside. The whole home is a holistic design, and we think about it that way from the very outset. The approach we take is as we whenever we're engaging with the clients in the very first instance, and often we're not even engaged at this stage. What we offer is as a low price point to come into a process. So we'll do a site analysis and a brief analysis and work out a floor plan that suits that brief and suits the site for a low commitment. And that way the client can get to know us a little bit better. We get to know the site. We get to work together in this first phase before they commit too much to the whole process. And for a couple of $1,000s, they get a plan of what they could happen on that site. And if they don't want to work with us after that, that's fine. They can take that plan and go to somebody else and get it done.
So that's like a pre-feasibility stage.
It is, but it also really works out their brief and gives them a rough floor plan that says, well, we can now take this to a builder and let's get some feedback before you commit to an architectural process. And that way they can understand, well, actually your build budget of maybe 2 million is actually needs to be 2.5 to fit this brief. And they can make that decision at that point after $2,000 a spend to scrap the project, to put more funds into it, to adapt their brief. And so we're doing that before they commit to any fees, really, and for all the consultants, to a process, to anything. And that really gets in front of that as an issue. And it then means that we're not compromising on the design as we go through the process. They know from the first instance what they're going to get, or what they're likely to get, at least throughout this whole process as they go through.
And the beauty of that is that's called confidence and having practical experience, because the example I was using before was, well, the whole idea is to not get to that point. And that comes back to that holistic approach that you said, that, well, there's no point getting plans in front of someone and then trying to redesign. It's about getting it right from the start.
Yeah, correct. I mean, value management, people see it as a dirty word often, and it can be because, it can make major compromises in the design if it's done at the wrong time. And if you can get ahead of that and not have to value manage whenever the design has been resolved, and do it before that, to say, well, do you really need that extra ensuite? Does this space need to be that big? If you can work it out in the briefing stage and make that aligned to the budget, then it's a much easier process to go through.
I remember when I was building and working for large construction management firms and large builders as well. And I remember having a conversation with quite an experienced foreman, and he used to always be, I guess, a bit fearful of the practical architects. It was always better from his perspective to have the architect that kind of didn't have that practical experience, not like you. So what's it like going to site and having that practical input? I'd imagine from your perspective, you obviously love it, but yeah, what's that like?
I haven't found builders that are against it at all, to be honest. They normally really embrace it, at least the builders that I work with, because they love the collaboration. They actually like to get involved in design as well. And if they have a hand in the design process, they're much more likely to want to build it properly at the end. And they'll often, not cut corners to achieve that in the end
Totally
as well.
agree.
And so it's a much better process if you can work with them from the very start and keep that communication open throughout the whole process and allow them input into, the structure of the building. If we could cut that cantilever back half a meter, you'll save $10,000. If you can get that out of them from the very first instance, that $10,000 goes a long way on something else. And so
Absolutely.
the whole process just becomes a lot better, and the builders enjoy it. They love it. The ones that I've worked with, um, and that allows me to then flex my design muscles a little bit more as well, and yeah, get the other side. So it's takes the practical and then really uses it to create something better.
So just on that, with that practical experience, there's a lot of emerging issues that are well publicized at the moment with defects and the quality of build. So from a leading architect's perspective, what do you see as the cause and effect of building defects and the emerging issues that are going on in the industry at the moment?
The biggest problem I think at the minute in Australia is that our building code is really archaic, and it's not based on a built process or an as built certification process. It's built on a design process, which means that throughout the construction documentation stage, we get certifications for the energy rating, the windows, the wall types that we need to put into the design. And that all gets documented, which is great. And so at the end of that stage, we get the tick to get a building permit, and then it goes off to site. What happens then is, and this is not trying to berate builders or have any issues with them, because a lot of them have been fantastic, but what happens is they don't always do it the way that it should be done. Some trades will cut corners, some will take insulation out areas to put plumbing in, to put services in, and they don't put it back again. So you get these holes in the building where it should be, and the certification that's on paper really means nothing then, because it doesn't comply in practice. And I think our process is broken in the case that it allows that to happen. As soon as the plasterboard goes up, nobody checks it to understand if there's an issue there. And then you get issues with drafts, you get installation missing, which causes condensation, you get poorly performing thermal envelope of the building. So I've been looking for ways in order to get ahead of that as a problem and offer what we're sort of referring to as true quality in our build design and build process. So putting a full system in place that manages that. And we've been looking towards Passive House for the answer. I'm sure you heard of Passive House as an emerging environmental strategy, really, that's one of the world's best. But within that, there's a lot of answers on how to solve this, because that's an as built certification process that ensures that the building is really airtight in its envelope. It ensures that there's insulation on every external component of the building. It ensures it's got a heat recovery system so that you can manage the ventilation inside and brings in natural air, but it also extracts CO2, VOCs, all the harmful things that come in. It can also help with COVID from that point of view, because it's extracting all of those molecules from the air, and things like radon and other things that cause cancers and so on. So we can offer a lot healthier building through this process as well.
Are you saying that the concepts and the principles of passive houses or passive buildings,
Mhm.
that ticks all those boxes in terms of when you're looking at a building code or trying to meet certain requirements, instead of looking at this detailed code and text and things in black and white, the whole passive principles, I guess, takes care of those issues in a nutshell.
It goes beyond those principles.
It goes beyond it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, for instance, the standard Australian house has air leakage of approximately 15 air changes an hour, and that's around windows, under doors, and so on. So you can imagine the amount of energy it takes to actually reheat that same or cool that air inside 15 times every hour. That's under a certain pressure load, mind you. So a passive house is zero point 0.6 air changes per hour. So that's how airtight it is inside, and that's why you have to have a heat recovery system then to actually manage that airflow and make sure that you're bringing in fresh air to the exact amount that you need. Now, you can still open windows and doors and all the things that you do in a standard house. It's no different really from that point of view.
Yeah, it's amazing when you actually go into a passive building. I mean, Jesse from G-Lux Builders, he's a good friend of the show, and I actually recorded an episode just like this in his passive house,
Mm.
which is under construction at the moment. And yeah, it was amazing, the whole airlock principle and the pressure test that you were talking about before. Yeah, it's incredible how it all works and functions.
You don't necessarily have to go the full way to get to zero point 0.6 air changes an hour. We're aiming in a lot of our homes for getting better than 3 air changes per hour, and that makes a huge difference.
So what's the practical aspects of managing that to get it down to 3? Like, what are some of the things that change that?
So the first thing that we look at is the envelope of the building, and we really design it quite differently. So we have to protect first of all the insulation layer and ensure that doesn't get compromised during the construction phase. Well, we're looking at SIPS panels at the minute, structural insulated panels, as part of the build structure itself, and that means a sandwich between two pieces of structure, and is protected, and it always remains there. So we have to ensure that that's a continuous line throughout the whole building. And in order to do that, we often batten out on the inside then to allow for services to run and so on. So it's not compromising that insulation at any point. It also allows a reduction in steel structure within that as well, so that you're again not putting steel into that insulation layer, which can cause, if you don't have insulation either side of the steel, for instance, you get thermal breaks in the building, which allows the heat and cool to conduct through from the outside to the inside, which causes condensation, which can be multiplied in a passive house because of the air tightness. So you've got to be
Yes.
really careful with it. But there's mechanisms within the design of the construction envelope itself that needs to be done as a first principle. So it's taking away the traditional really and rewriting it a little bit and how you put it together. And then it's air testing. So ensuring that we do air testing 2 or 3 times during the construction process. So that's a bit of a checks and balances for the builder to ensure that as they're putting these layers in place, that they're actually achieving the right standards. And then it's getting really good suppliers for windows and so on as well that aren't leaking and compromising that envelope at the end of the day.
So that's basically double or triple glazing or UPVC.
Yeah, look, unfortunately the UPVC ones perform really well, even though they're really ugly and not very environmentally friendly.
How do they compare with cost? Because I remember looking into UPVC windows probably 10, 15 years ago, and they were a lot more expensive at the time.
Mm.
But geez, they function really well. 3 types of functions with the same window. You can have it as a casing window, you can have it as an
Yeah,
awning window, and as a, I don't know, like a slide as well, all in the one function.
yeah, they do. And look, they've been commonplace in Europe for a long time. My house in Ireland that's 300 years old has UPVC double glazed windows since the 80s.
Yeah.
And they haven't taken off in Australia for a number of reasons, but they seem to be coming in a little bit more. We don't use them anywhere because we just hate the aesthetic of them, to be honest. So we
Well,
largely,
it's funny that the price of aluminium at the time of recording this is going through the roof. So
yeah,
I'm going to make a big call that we'll see the emergence of more UPVC because, yeah, there's some serious industry things going on at the moment with aluminium right now. So you never
yeah.
know, it might bring them back in a bit.
Yeah, it could do. The other options, composite windows. So they're actually timber windows with an aluminium on the outside as an aesthetical and maintenance issue that is managed from the outside. So you don't have to maintain the timber externally, and that they work really well as well because they don't have that thermal conductivity through because the timber manages it. And as you may know, the thermal breaks are a necessity at a very minimum on the aluminium or metal ones because obviously metal conducts the heat and the cold through a lot, and
Definitely.
they become a major issue in something like a passive house. So yeah, we're veering more towards the composite ones. We have been using aluminium a lot, but we're struggling to get ones that will meet the standards that we need to achieve.
I think in a nutshell, after discussing all of that, it's not like you as a builder can do these things on your own. It goes back to what is the theme of this episode of engaging you early on in the
Mm,
piece,
that's
just
right.
as important as engaging the builder after that to collaborate and work together as a team, as opposed to trying to take a design and then add some passive qualities to get that energy level improved and get it back down to that rating of 3. You just can't do that. You need to do it from the start.
Yeah, and it's much more than just the builders and the client as well. It's the whole supply chain, and so we look at our houses as a kit of parts, and every one of those individual parts needs to be analysed and assessed to ensure that they meet these standards as well. So yeah, we go through that in quite a lot of detail to always try and follow the market and see what the next best thing is in each of these different areas, so that we're building that library constantly of different suppliers and different materials and fixtures and fittings that will actually raise the quality of what we're trying to do.
So we've been talking a lot about work, and obviously we're just coming out of COVID lockdown in Melbourne at the moment. So what does Roger like to do when he's not designing these beautiful, amazing projects?
I love playing football, as in English football, soccer. So I'm a big Liverpool Football Club fan, and so I'll get up. You'll often find me at 3 o'clock in the morning in the living room with the lights off, trying not to wake the kids up and screaming at the TV. And so that's one of my big passions, and then I play a couple of times a week whenever COVID isn't around. Um, Looking forward to getting back to seeing my mates and playing some football again. And I also do cycling as well on the weekends, and love doing that. I find it's a really good way just to clear the head and have some me time out on the road. And I like pushing myself and challenging myself to catch the cyclist ahead, and I like that drive and the whole process of cycling.
That's the competitiveness of being one of 8 coming out, probably.
Yeah, possibly. Well, it's the whole thing of being out on the road, and you could be cycling for maybe half an hour and you don't see anybody, and you go, God, this is hard. Why the hell would I do this? This is a terrible idea. And then suddenly you see somebody, 500 yards ahead of you, and go, I'm going to catch that person. And then all of a sudden your legs are completely fine again. Everything else goes away. To me, it teaches me that it's all a mental thing, and it's any sort of pain and heartache that you come in work and sport and anything really can be worked out, and it's just a mental issue that you need to get around and fight through, and you find the answer at the other side. So yeah, that's some of the things that I like to do, apart from obviously spend a lot of time with my family, and that's been increased a lot. I'm still working from home since when was it, April 2020. So
It's a long time ago now,
it's a
isn't it?
long time ago, and so you almost forget what it's like to be amongst people again. I'm really looking forward to getting back and doing more of that again, which is now starting, which is great.
Absolutely. Okay, Roger. So for those that are listening to this and want to get into contact with you, what's the best way to go about it?
We've obviously got our website, borlandarchitecture.com.au. Got an Instagram page as well and Facebook page, so you can obviously follow us through those means. But yeah, hopefully you'll be able to see some more of our work that's been completed now towards the end of this year, beginning of next year, coming up on those channels. It's one of the difficult things about architecture, I think, is that any project process takes 2 to 3 years to get done. So We've got a lot of projects at the moment on the table, but also on site, and a lot of that's not on our website and so on yet. So if somebody's interested and wants to see some of our work that's work in progress, reach out, and happy to arrange a site visit or something so you can come around and have a look.
Yeah, and I think also too the importance of being able to pick up the phone and having a chat with a practical architect like yourself, to be able to get into contact and throw some ideas around, whether it's suppliers or people that are building certain products as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I just love talking about architecture generally. My wife's sick of it at this stage, so very, very much welcome any external influence coming in and wanting to have a chat about their project or what their ambitions are, and see how we might be able to help them through that process.
Absolutely. Roger, thanks again for coming on to Build Hatch. It's been really nice to sit down and talk to you, a practical architect, and hear your story. And definitely look forward to following you guys in the future and seeing all these amazing projects come to life.
Thanks very much. Much appreciated.
Well, that was another Build Hatch episode with myself and Roger from Borland Architecture in Melbourne. As usual, please check out our Instagram and other socials where you'll be able to learn more about our guests and the features of the work that we talk about. Have a great week, and you'll hear me again on the airwaves next week. Thanks for listening to another episode of Build Hatch.
You have experienced a Build Hatch developed production.